Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Real Chat Podcast. I got my man David Leah from Tennessee joining us today. So, what's up, David? How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Justin. And just a quick tweak. David Lee. Last name is
David
Lee.
Lee. There we go.
Yes.
Okay,
I
yeah,
know. I
yeah,
know. It looks
definitely.
like Leah, but pronounced like Lee. So there
Well,
you go.
I should have definitely I should have
All good,
chopped
man.
that up
All
with you.
good. All good. Not a
I
problem.
love it. I love it. So, um, what is it that you do? So I see, you're a coach. We talked a little bit about that. Like, what type of coaching does that entail?
Yeah. Together with my wife, we help men, women, and couples begin to identify, validate, and heal their emotional wounds that come from unmet needs in their childhood. So we help individuals begin to heal their trauma wounding that's preventing them from having the relationships of their dreams. So we believe that every person on the planet, Justin, every single one of us, still possesses unprocessed, unhealed, unreleased trauma wounding from childhood. And that is the reason why we have complications, frustrations, concerns, and confusions in our marriage relationships.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So it has to do with, like, what is polarity? So how does
Yeah,
polarity
it's a great
play into
question.
that?
It's a great question. Yeah. So polarity is how we identify polarity is that everyone possesses both masculine and feminine energy. Every single person on the planet possesses both masculine and feminine energy. I do, you do, we all do. What we often see, though, is actually trauma prevents us from identifying what our core energy is. So, for example, my core energy, as I've identified, is masculine. I do possess feminine energy, but far too often, these energies actually get inversed. And so often, men and women, couples will come to us where he, the husband, is more in his wounded feminine energy and she is more in her wounded masculine energy. This is what we refer to as an inverted marriage dynamic.
Okay.
Now, how do those inversions happen? The aforementioned unprocessed, unreleased, unknown childhood trauma actually brings that individual away from truly who they are as an individual.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's very interesting because I actually have had many conversations without knowing about polarity or knowing anything, you know, of what you're talking about as far as um, the dynamics of it. But I do know
Mhm.
that me and my lady often talk about how, since we got back together, she's able to be feminine. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
She doesn't have to carry both of the bags. She's not the mom and the dad. Um, and to be able to follow someone who can lead her in a masculine way, and just
Exactly.
having a relationship like that. And a lot
Mhm.
of what we talk about stems from trauma,
Mhm.
childhood trauma, past relationships, things like that,
Mhm. Mhm.
and she's always had to be, I always told her she was rough around the edges, and she never liked that. She said, I'm not rough around the edges. I said, hey, you're rough around the edges, baby. I said, it's because you definitely can roll with the big dogs. So,
Yeah, I will, right here live, Justin. I will provide you some free coaching. You ready for it, brother?
yes, yes.
Never ever tell your woman again that she has rough edges. And I promise you, she will have a smile on her face more often. I promise you that. So, but let me touch on that for just a moment because you said, "Wow, what rough around the edges," meaning what you were translating was ultimately. Let me, correct me if I'm wrong.
Mhm.
Was wow, she feels like she is more in her masculine energy. She is a more in her commanding, dominant, powerful, strong energy than most likely that she ever wanted to be. So
Yeah.
what we find is that women, when we get to the heart of their soul and spirit, never ever ever want to be more dominant in their masculine energy. But because of unprocessed childhood wounding that led them into striking up the walls of wounded masculine energy to protect themselves, they then went through life and intentionally, subconsciously though, chose men who were more in their feminine to match their inverted energy because an inverted marriage dynamic is polarized, it's inversed. So it can feel right, it can feel aligned. But the actuality is it's completely misaligned. And when men and women begin to discover this, which is so much of what we do as education, much like we're discussing here on your
Right.
podcast, is far too often individuals have no idea why they're so confused, why they're having all of this conflict and confusion and dysregulation and arguments and all of these energies that feel so out of balance. They have no idea why. They think, oh, we need some more astute communication skills in our relationship.
Hmm.
We need to have more sex. We need to have more date nights. We need to have a better in law. The
Right.
reality is, has nothing to do with that. It's actually those dysregulations, those inverted energies were there long before you met your spouse, believe it or not.
Right.
And in fact, those dysregulated inverted energies is actually what drew you to your spouse. You may not have known it,
Okay.
but your wounds actually attracted the wounds of your
Right.
partner, often referred to as a trauma bond.
Wow. It's crazy you said that because, my lady and I, we actually met 20 years ago. Like we dated 20 years ago, and in between that process she had a child, I was married, and we found our way back to each other. And now, things are just going uphill from there. We communicate. Um, I think what she calls it is she's able to be submissive, not in like a submissive, I'm gonna tell you what to do way, but in a submissive way where I can lead the family,
Mhm.
and not be criticizing and, just demanding this is your role and this is what you need to do. Because
Mhm.
I would never tell her that. She's a nurse and she works 16-hour shifts. So if I ever told her, hey, you need to cut back and stay home a little more, then we'd have a whole nother problem.
Mhm. Okay, but
So,
definitely potential. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So just to provide a little bit more clarity, when a man is in his wounded feminine energy, he is more in his reluctant and passive and people pleasing energy. When a woman is in her wounded masculine energy, she is more controlling, she is more dominant, she is attached to achievement. There's a need for her to be right in every conversation. Okay, so yeah, and that is a wounded masculine energy. It doesn't mean it's related to gender. Really important to know.
mhm,
So we also have couples that he is in his wounded masculine, where he's more controlling, and we have the opposite partner in her wounded feminine energy, where she is more to the word you use, which we don't actually leverage the word submissive. Submissive to us says weak. We actually
okay,
leverage and reframe the word surrender, because what
okay,
we know is that when a woman in a aligned marriage dynamic where she can feel soft and surrendering in her feminine energy, she wants and craves to follow her man.
hmm,
Why?
wow,
Because he is first leading himself. This is a fundamental truth and pillar of our teaching and coaching. When I'm working with men one on one, is that your wife will never follow you, not in totality, not with
mhm,
the ultimate trust in levels of what you desire, until you begin to heal the wounds within you that have prevented you from either being over controlling, wounded masculine, or overly passive, wounded feminine. So
right,
it all begins with each individual spouse, by the way.
okay,
So oftentimes people will come to us and go, help us save our marriage. And I lovingly say back to them, you don't save, fix, or mend a relationship or marriage. It's impossible. You do not save, you do not fix or work on a relationship. That's a myth. You can only begin to work on you. So I work with married couples, but I work with the spouses independently, individually,
right,
in a one on one coaching environment. Why? Because each individual spouse has their own unique trauma history, their own unique story of how they grew
right.
up and the family dynamics, and each are worthy of that individual attention.
And once they fix that, then they can circle back and they can have a good relationship moving forward instead of like you said,
Potentially.
fix my
Yeah.
marriage, can you
Yeah.
fix my marriage? And it's like now you're looking at the past, you're looking at, the present, you're not looking at, hey, I'm better now and let's move on from here.
Yeah. Yeah. You bring
Wow.
up a good point, Justin. I want to touch on that for a second. Oftentimes, as well, is couples will come to us, or one individual, one spouse will come to us for help and support. And the expectation is, well, if I do my work, then the relationship will obviously get better. And often what I say is, let me be crystal clear about this. There are no guarantees in marriage. Yes, I'm going to say that again for your audience who might have missed it. There are no guarantees in marriage. The
True.
only guarantee is your own individual, autonomous, sovereign healing, growth, and transformation pathway. That's the only guarantee that I can ever make you. If you commit to your own healing journey and we can help support and lead you in that direction, no one will ever be able to take that away from you. Now,
Right.
if your spouse chooses to go a different way, if they choose not to go into a healing, growth, and transformative pathway, that's on them.
Mhm.
And I realize that can be a really, really, really hard truth to hear and to stomach and to digest. But the reality is, we cannot, and believe me, I've tried, and you probably have too, Justin,
Mhm.
try to control, manipulate, coerce, or guide your spouse to change. It
Yes.
doesn't work. It's never happened in the history of the world. Never, ever. It's never happened and it never will. We
Many
can only,
relationships.
exactly, we can only control our own path. And so the men and women that we work with, the married couples that we work with, see absolutely powerful, efficient, and effective ways of healing their wounds. And that could then lead to a more aligned and more elevated relationship. But it could. There are no
Right. No
guarantees that just
guarantees.
because I'm doing my work and she's doing her work, that doesn't necessarily mean that the relationship will continue to thrive, but it will guarantee that you will thrive.
Right. And that's what I kind of went through that, as I went through my divorce and started working on myself,
Yeah.
and which led me to what I'm doing now as a life coach myself. And it it definitely comes to a point where you say, "Hey, I'm good. And if this isn't working, then we need to go a different direction." And it's okay, to say that. I mean, I definitely tell some of the clients I work with, like, it's okay to have two different perspectives, um, and just say it's not working, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes you just got to find that person. So, but yeah, I definitely want to ask you. So, how did this start? Where did this start? Um, with the study and you becoming this style of a coach?
Yeah. It's a great question. So I hired my first coach to help me figure out life about 7 years ago, having no idea this is where this was going to lead. But I remember beginning to work with him. And at the time, I was still in a full time position with a $1 billion company doing sales.
Mhm.
And he said to me fairly early on, he said, David, I've noticed, I've recognized you have been coaching people for 25 years and not getting paid for it. So stop it. I said, thank you, sir. Heard him. Fantastic. Shout out to Justin. You know who you are if you happen to hear this. And so over the next 18 months, he began to prep me from a business standpoint, personal development, all of these different facets of my life to help launch my coaching practice. And over that time, I began to realize, my niche was working with individuals to help them discover what's blocking them in their relationship. That felt absolutely aligned for who I am. It
Right.
wasn't until, though, years later, that I came across a couple of my mentors now and those who have dramatically influenced my trajectory, where I was introduced to trauma healing and introduced to masculine and feminine energy independently. And then over time, my wife and I began to fuse those two modalities together. And now we have a unique, absolutely proprietary healing modality, trauma informed polarity, where we help
Wow.
men and women identify their masculine and feminine energetic wounding, i.e., trauma, to help them heal those wounds and to lead them into, again, the marriage of their dreams.
Wow, and I love that because now they get, I often get asked by my lady, um, I want to talk. I want to give my perspective, and I love that because you have your wife, to give that perspective, and I think that kind of makes it a little more comfortable for women to understand, from a woman's point of view, as well as coming from a man's point of view. So I think that makes things a little easier. So have you been doing this the whole time with your wife?
Yeah, so I launched this coaching practice on June 2nd, 2020. Now, if you remember what was going on in the world at that time,
Yes.
yes, exactly. There was this thing called a pandemic. Well, I launched my coaching practice really at the perfect time. In fact, I am unusual in that 2020 was potentially one of the most profoundly effective and transformative years of my life. That's when I launched the coaching practice and really began to understand this is what I need. This is what I was chosen. This is what I was created to do. Well,
Wow.
prior, 2 weeks prior to be precise, I met Paige, my wife, on a Zoom call, actually,
Wow.
a Zoom conference. It was supposed to be live, but the organizer transformed it from a live conference to virtual, which at that time was unprecedented. Like, you
Wow.
what?
Yeah.
We're going to take a conference and put it on Zoom, and we did. And at 9 a.m. on May 14th, 2020, I appeared on the Zoom screen, and so did she.
Wow.
And I felt her long before I saw her. But boy, did I see her, let me tell you.
Felt that
And as she
energy.
tells the, that's right. As she will tell you, she said, I caught you looking at me. And then I always say, Justin, well, wait a minute. You had to be looking at me for you to catch me looking at you. So
We're both
that's a
we're
common
both looking
denomination.
at the camera.
Yeah, exactly. We're both staring
I
at something.
I love it. I love it, man.
Yeah,
That is
yeah.
a wonderful, wonderful story. Uh, man, I love it. I don't even how to come back from that, but
Well,
I just
let
know
me give
that.
you a little bit more. So we met and we became friends. We became friends, and we uh, honored um, our friendship for several months. We knew we had a connection. I had no idea what would now be taking place. Had no idea, but I felt energetically that I was connected to this person, and that we would do something together, some really powerful work together. Had no idea that we would become romantic partners and eventually become married and
Right.
eventually become business partners. But over those months, we began to really mine deeply into what we wanted to be and become. And about 8 months after that, she, who had been doing her own work and her own coaching, came under the umbrella of Daring Deeply, our coaching practice. That's the name of our coaching
Wow.
practice.
Okay.
And that's when we became partners in business and life and love. And
Wow.
over those next couple of years, we really began to fuse this unique and proprietary modality of trauma informed polarity together. And now, in fact, when we met, Justin, we were inverted. I was more in my feminine, she was more in her masculine energy. And so
Okay.
over time, when we were introduced to trauma healing and masculine and feminine energy, we began to do the work individually, independently, and
Wow.
we began to reverse that misaligned dynamic. And now I'm far more in my masculine, she's far more in her feminine. So we're actually living out what we're teaching and coaching, which is what an honor, what a blessing to be able to actually be doing this work and then showing men and women all over the planet to do the same.
I know we're glitching now, but that actually makes all right, there we go. We're back. So we had some Wi-Fi issues. But no, that actually makes a lot of sense because as you were saying, you got to this conference, you know, and where you met, and it started with you seeking out help. You were getting into these things to work on yourself, and obviously she was working on things for herself. And I know a lot of times from a woman's perspective, they're doing this and they're like, putting herself out there to join this conference, and so that makes a lot of sense with the reverse, masculinity and femininity. So, but yeah, I definitely got to, that's amazing. That is an amazing story. So, what are your next goals? Like, what are some of the things that you have, on the table moving forward? I know you have the coaching. Are you going to plan on doing some of these conferences yourself?
It's a great question. So, right now, we're in the middle of our team working on some rebranding, a new podcast, and a brand new website. For we
Okay.
are continuing to move in the direction of working, Justin, with those who have the most global impact. So ultimately, I want to be working with the top 1% of those individuals on the planet. I
Yeah.
want to, in essence, be working and coaching Oprah Winfrey, Elon Musk,
Right. Hey,
and to
that's
where we,
great.
yeah, exactly. So they already have the ears and the eyes of the world,
Mhm.
and we want to help influence and impact how they're navigating their own trauma wounding, and to help them have even more deep impact upon the world. So we continue to move in that direction and really, really accentuate and elevate our brand to
Mhm.
continue to get into the eyes and the ears and the audiences of those
Right.
amazing individuals.
Podcasting is definitely a way to go, to reach out and be able to globally reach millions.
Mhm.
So do you have a podcast now or
So we had what I refer to as an amateur podcast, to
okay,
where
same as what
Paige
I'm
and
doing.
I. Hey, there you go. So
Got to
you can
start
find some of
somewhere.
those. Yeah, exactly. You can find some of those episodes on our YouTube channel. So just search Daring Deeply on YouTube. But we're
Okay.
actually we're actually partnering with an incredible podcast production company here in the Nashville area that are going to take care of us as far as production, post production, marketing, et cetera, et cetera. And they have worked with some of the top folks really in the world as far as podcast production. So we're getting ready to launch that later this fall. So
That is
we're really,
amazing.
really thrilled to launch our new iteration of our podcast and leverage really amazingly talented folks to do so with us.
Wow, that is amazing. That is because, like you were saying, you want to reach the 1% and things like that because a lot of times we don't see, what really goes on, behind the camera, and I only say that because this is, celebrating mental health and things like that. And that has a lot to do with it, and
Mhm.
a lot of what I talk about on my podcast has to do with mental health, because a lot of times we we portray ourselves in a way that is from trauma, so like I'm writing a book right now called the trauma I never knew I had because I
Mhm.
never looked at it. I always suppressed it. I always, we're always raised to especially men, men are raised and they're like, hey, we don't cry, we don't do this, and
Mhm.
it's all BS because all of a sudden here you go into a relationship and it doesn't work out and you're wondering why relationship after relationship is not working
Mhm.
out because you're trying to be a man without understanding what it is to be a man,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
feel as a man,
Mhm.
because we got feelings too, and that's the best way I could say it is we got feelings too. A lot of times
Yeah.
people do things and say things and they expect for us to shrug it off, but that's not
Mhm.
what happens,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Well said. In fact, that's a tenet in which I am coaching the men in our programs to where men are supposed to feel, men are supposed to express those feelings with this caveat: men are to express their feelings with a plan. That's what makes his masculine expression of emotion different. Because as we know, Justin, and you probably know this too, men and women are different, friends. Okay,
Yeah,
got
yeah,
news for you. Newsflash: men and women are vastly different, and the way that we experience and express emotions is vastly different. A man must have a plan. Now, what does that mean? It means that he is navigating a course in which to move through those emotions. So if he does express sadness, if he does express depression, if he does express self pity, even, that he then has a plan to help move through it, that he informs his wife. Because when a woman sees her man consistently in his feels, as the kids say these days, it is terrifying to his wife. That's right, I said that. It is terrifying for a woman to experience a man's emotions without him communicating to her that he has a plan.
right,
So we've seen this over, and by the way, it's inherently critical for a man to have a plan anyway, right?
definitely.
But when a man is in his feminine emotion, it's critical that he communicates, "Hey, babe, I know I'm experiencing this sadness. I'm experiencing some self pity. I'm experiencing some depressive seasons. And know this, that I have a plan to move forward. I'm seeking help. I'm getting a therapist. I'm hiring David Lee as a coach. I'm hiring Justin Jackson as a coach. But I have a plan. I'm moving through this. I'm navigating through meditation, through prayer, through journaling, through whatever access point that he needs in order to move forward. That is
Right.
that is a critical step in understanding masculinity that we men were never taught. We were either told that you're not supposed to feel, as you were indicating,
Mhm.
and so we shut down all of those emotions, which is incredibly unhealthy, or we overly express.
Yeah.
And that
Becomes
will
trouble.
always, exactly, that will always, by the way, through our lens of polarity, that will always attract a woman who's more in her masculine energy. Why?
Mhm.
Because that woman in her wounded masculine energy will always attract a man who needs to be taken care of.
Right.
Why? Because he's still searching for a mother.
Right.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
she's still looking to be the head of the household,
A mother.
because that's what she
Yeah,
has to do.
exactly.
That's what she has to do.
100%.
And it definitely, yeah, you're right, and having lived experiences is what makes this conversation great, because I definitely experienced a lot of both sides, of it. Um, like I said, I was married, for 8 years, and it was a lot of bowing down and just kind of trying to go with the flow because that's I was having self pity, and that's because
Mhm,
I wasn't working on myself, And the minute I started working on myself, that can become, and if you don't communicate, like you said, keyword communication, because if you don't communicate, it becomes a threat, you know, because you're not saying anything, you're not letting this plan be known to your spouse,
mhm.
and you're just like, "Well, I'm working out, I'm getting better, I'm getting healthy, but I'm not telling you anything,"
Right.
and they're like, "Well, what's going on?" So it becomes
Mhm.
a threat, and that puts them back into a place where they wanna put walls up, you know?
Exactly.
So, and it goes both ways, so, man, this was definitely a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come on to the Real Chat podcast and just chop it up and have some real chat. And we're definitely going to do this again. But before we go, I want to ask you a couple things. So, if you could have any superpower, what would that be?
Oh, such a good question, Justin. I wanna fly. I wanna fly. Yeah, that's it. Every time I'm a huge golf fan. I love to watch golf too.
Okay. Yep. Yep.
And they have the shots that they take on these golf broadcasts from these drones that just fly through the trees and right overhead and watch the
Yeah.
golf ball as it goes. I'd love to do that without, without being in an airplane.
Seeing
Just
it in
go and
person.
fly. That's right.
See it in
Yes,
person.
that's right.
Man, that's awesome. So, where can we find you for the viewers? Where can they find David Lee? What is some of your information that we can reach out and find you?
Absolutely. We have a very robust following both on TikTok and Instagram. You can follow us there. You can search David Lee, Google me. And again, the last name is spelled Lea. That's important. Last name is Lee, Lea. We have podcasts. We have podcast episodes, that amateur podcast episodes over on YouTube. You can find us there. We're on Facebook as well. But we have like I said, we have a very robust, large following on TikTok and Instagram. That's the best way to find me to really understand. Oh, who is this guy? Who is this guy, and who is his wife, and what are they all about? And certainly come, please, as I always say, Justin, please come and creep, stalk us, please, please, please come. That's what we want. Come and see what we're all about. And by the way, I always answer all the DMs that are sent to me personally. So that's really important to me. So come and find me on social media, send me a DM, and we'll have a conversation. So I look forward to meeting folks that may come from this conversation.
Oh, definitely. Again, everyone, this is David Lee. So if you want to check out some good coaching and get your mindset right, reach out, get a hold of him, and it'll definitely help. Thank you a lot, brother. I appreciate you for joining us.
Thank you, Justin.